Rockaways Productions presents The Casey Waters Show, episode 479, Pricing the Priceless by Paula Diperna, Part 4. Hello, I'm your host, Casey Waters. Well, today, there's a few things working against me. Well, we got the finches and the cockatiels nearby. Although they're covered, they might occasionally chirp. Then there's a thunderstorm nearby, so that might create some audio disturbances. Well, and then I have a cat. Well, that might not work against me. It's hard to say. I have Ambrosia. Maybe she's out of camera range, but anyway, she's down here where I'm petting. So, today I'll continue with Pricing the Priceless by Paula Diperna. Here, the author looks at putting a price on the air we breathe, water resources, and other natural resources in an attempt that if we understand the value of these resources, maybe we'll do more to protect them and reduce climate change. Today's show will feature background footage from Lane Pinnacle. This time, I hiked in from Potato Field Gap. To get to Potato Field Gap, take the Blue Ridge Parkway heading north from Asheville, North Carolina. When you see the sign saying Craggy Gardens, the Potato Field Gap is just, well, maybe a couple hundred feet. On the left, a small dirt pullover. Then you hike back south along the parkway, and the Mountains to Sea Trail will go off to the right. So you head south on the Mountains to Sea Trail, and eventually you'll reach Lane Pinnacle. Well, I guess you know you're there, because the trail will take a sharp right at the summit. So, now let's continue with Pricing the Priceless by Paula Diperna, including mining of ore for steel, transport, production of steel, and fabrication of the refrigerator. If the manufacturer reduces emissions in the production chain so that two refrigerators can be manufactured, but still only half a ton is emitted, a 100% reduction in carbon intensity has occurred. Half a ton still hits the atmosphere, but now that half ton of emissions has supported double the economic work. Two refrigerators for the emissions of one. Double earnings on the same emissions level means that an increase in economic output has occurred without emissions growth. Such decoupling of emissions growth from economic growth is a nirvana of climate change mitigation, because it splits economic normal economic activity, including jobs creation and the prosperity people hope for from continued reliance on fossil fuel. If reasonable economic growth can be maintained without increasing emissions, and as emissions fall, an economy climate steady state could be reached. The true incarnation of net zero emissions, likely elusive, but surely a carbon emissions ideal. All in all, China began its market trading intensity tonnage units rather than absolute tonnage units, perhaps to express its autonomy and to stand out from all other carbon markets. Ultimately, however, a trove of emissions management knowledge can be yielded by the intensity approach, as power plants and manufacturers in China are forced to cap and trade, to cap and reduce carbon intensity, but also expected to keep up productivity. They will have to be quite inventive in using less carbon and perhaps adopt best in class procedures quickly, driving down carbon intensity product by product, yuan by yuan, could also, in theory, catalyze potential commercial benefits for products made in China under intensity reduction rules, perhaps earning them a sales advantage if they can be marketed on a less carbon intensive than competitors. Many manufacturers worldwide calculate the carbon intensity of given products so they can understand the product's whole carbon footprint. But only China is attempting a carbon market cap and trade using intensity as the tradable unit. In this sense, an intensity cap and trade can work to decarbonize economic activity both at the process and product level and push Chinese products to the forefront. The intensity metric is not fungible with markets based on absolute tonnage reductions, a disconnect that could isolate China's market even as other markets press towards global integration. Still, recognizing this, as China moves its market eventually to scale, China could keep and publish carbon accounts in both intensity and absolute terms. In fact, to determine carbon intensity, absolute tonnage must first be calculated. It is the denominator. So, not to widely oversimplify, it is just one calculation to translate intensity back to absolute metric tons so that China's market could eventually engage in global transactions. Harmonization, in other words, is not mission impossible. Now, let's go to page 118 of Pricing the Priceless by Paula Diperna. Devices known as continuous emissions monitors, CEMs, installed literally on smokestacks, tracking actual emissions in real time, can easily verify CO2 output accurately. CEMs have been installed on U.S. power plants at least since the original acid rain program under the U.S. EPA. In China, CEMs have been much discussed, including in discussions with the U.S. EPA, but were not widely installed, though they would greatly help resolve what is known as the monitoring and verification MRV problem that haunts China's carbon market as observers remain skeptical of China's compliance rigor. Now, let's go to page 129. The brilliant, stately, and at times officious Boutros Ghali, Secretary General of the UN at that time, tried to convey the stakes in relatively simple terms. How to leverage prosperity to alleviate poverty. How much government leadership. How much hands off. How much capitalism was too much. As he put it in his landmark Agenda for Development in 1997, a plan the UN General Assembly requested to chart the future relevance of the UN. Boutros Ghali envisioned a worldwide culture of development, distilling this one for all for one vision to 5 timeless principles that read many years later as if fresh ink. Without peace, human resources cannot be used effectively. Without economic growth as the engine to development, there cannot be any sustainable, broad-based improvement to material welfare. Without environmental protection, the basic needs of human survival are eroded. Without social justice, growing imbalance threatens society, and without free political participation, development remains fragile and permanently endangered. Boutros Ghali did not shrink from declaring whether this vision is fulfilled or not will be measured by what this living generation of the world's people and their leaders make or fail to make of the United Nations. Now, let's go to page 136, towards the bottom of the page, of Pricing the Priceless by Paula Diperna. In December 2022, Florida also pulled $2 billion from management by BlackRock, and the state's CFO, Jimmy Patronis, said that in uncertain financial times, I need partners within the financial services industry who are as committed to the bottom line as we are, and I don't trust BlackRock's ability to deliver. Patronis also declared BlackRock CEO Larry Fink is on a campaign to change the world. He's championed stakeholder capitalism and believes that capitalism has the power to shape society. To meet this end, the asset management company has leaned heavily into environmental, social, and governance standards, known as ESG, to help police who should and who should not gain access to capital, using our cash, however, to fund BlackRock's social engineering project isn't something Florida ever signed up for. Florida's divestment from BlackRock, implicitly rejecting climate change concerns inherent in the ESG approach, came as the state also mandated that all Florida homeowners buy flood insurance in the aftermath of the catastrophic cost of Hurricane Ian that had hit the state just that September, dropping torrential rains. Verging on Category 5 status, Ian's wild winds approached 150 miles an hour, tearing structures apart and whipping up storm surges and widespread flooding. The superstorm reduced many towns and homes to shambles, and at that time, only roughly half of the state's homeowners had coverage against flooding. Now, let's go to page 145 of Pricing the Priceless by Paula Diperna. The metals company, TMC, which is outfitting the ship and owns at least 3 seabed mining contracts issued by ISA, said it will be the world's first ship classed as a subsea mining vessel by the American Bureau of Shipping, with projected first commercial operations at the end of 2023. More than a dozen other companies from around the world also hold contracts. Outside of any national jurisdiction, the coveted zone of action is Clarion Clipperton, CCZ, a 1.7 million square mile area of deep ocean between Hawaii and Mexico, a stretch of sea that would cover the continental United States, and according to TMC, the world's largest known source of battery metals. That the polymetallic nodules existed has been known since the late 19th century, and according to ISA, nodule growth is one of the slowest of all geological phenomena, in the order of a centimeter over several million years. The age of Pacific Ocean nodules is therefore 2 to 3 million years. So, the phosphate script declares that the nodules formed over time, immeasurable in human terms, that can be exploited, likely exhausted in a few human decades, including, we can assume, cost to oceanic biodiversity. Exploitation of deep sea minerals remain dormant for lack of commercial viability, but the projected insatiable demand for batteries hasten the seabed mining idea. Nori and TMC plan to move ahead with their plan, invoking a 2-year notice provision that allows parties to announce their intention to mine to ISA, which in turn commits to review any given proposal, even if no environmental protection regime yet exists. But how, realistically, to monitor seabed mining with what might be claimed as environmentally responsible procedures, if environmental caution or remediation is even possible so deep undersea. To mine seabed nodules means scraping the seafloor, drilling, and sucking up seawater and sediment to ships above, where separation of seawater and rocks takes place, after which the residue sediment is shot back into the sea in a plume of return we could hardly envision as healthy. Now, let's go to page 155. In the United States, a similar signature water global infamy occurred about 15 years later in Flint, Michigan, a city once bustling with American manufacturing, but where gradual industrial abandonment left the city financially stressed. Under-equipped town officials faced constant budget shortfalls. The state of Michigan took over Flint's financial management in 2011 in a fiscal emergency similar to that which would soon hit Detroit in 2013 and led to the crisis over the DIA art collection and art in a box compromise. Detroit, nearby and itself financially stretched, did figure indirectly in Flint's water crisis. Detroit had been selling Lake Huron water to Flint for roughly 50 years. However, in 2013, officials in Flint decided the time had come to instead draw water directly from the Flint River to meet Flint's need. To cut costs and reportedly save $5 million in water fees. Prescient and alarmed water engineers and residents pushed back on the switch immediately. The low quality of Flint River water was notorious. Meanwhile, critically, Flint officials failed to include in the switchover plan treatment of Flint River water with anti-corrosives to avoid lead leaching from antiquated plumbing, a service the Detroit system had provided as a matter of course. The switchover proceeded anyway, and as of April 2014, within weeks, complaints rolled in from households and businesses about the foul smell, taste, and color of the water. In October 2014, General Motors announced its Flint engine plant would no longer use Flint municipal water because the water corroded its pipes. Flint water officials changed nothing, but Flint residents received increasingly frequent boil water notices due to alarming levels of bacteria in the drinking water. And in 2014, an outbreak of Legionnaire's disease struck the city, eventually killing 12 people. Fecal coliform counts rose. Boil water notices kept coming. But boiling water concentrates lead, and lead levels in Flint water skyrocketed, as did levels in the blood of Flint residents, especially children. Over time, full-blown public alarms sounded in Flint. Finally, in October 2015, Flint reconnected to the Detroit water system. Flint's fast-moving water crisis had been national nightly news, and what had been propelled by the expectation of cost savings in 2013 ended up in 2021 in a roughly $600 million civil suit settlement won against the state of Michigan by Flint residents who had suffered disease and hardship. Additional criminal charges were filed against numerous city and state officials, including the then governor, citing negligence. In between, in 2016, President Barack Obama had declared a federal emergency in Flint, triggering an immediate infusion of $5 million in federal funds, with additional $100 million eventually appropriated to meet Flint's needs for water testing, bottled water, and the basic replacement of pipes. Flint's name became infamously associated with water catastrophe. Now, let's go to page 166 of Pricing the Priceless by Paula Diperna. In the end, scarcity reverberates in nearly impossible decisions. Who shall determine whether rights to use water can be transferred from farms to suburbs, or whether almonds should be grown at the expense of other crops, or cotton versus maize, or maize versus
Casey Waters Show. Producer, Casey Waters. Graphic editing, Judson Laird. Please note our new email address, CaseyWaters2 @CaseyWaters.com.